I'm in Exodus in my daily Bible reading, and I've noticed something odd. We spend chapters reading about Moses, the plagues, the burning bush, the Red Sea, the mountain encounters with God. But when it comes to his family, especially his sons, the narrative grows quiet, almost silent. We do know their names. When Jethro brought Moses' wife and sons to him in the wilderness, Scripture says, "The name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land, and the name of the other, Eleazar, for he said, the God of my father was my help, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh." Exodus 18, 3-4. Those names speak volumes about Moses' journey. Gershom reminds us of Moses' exile in Midian. Eleazar points back to God's deliverance. These boys were part of the story, but they never seem to enter the spotlight. We never read about Gershom or Eleazar standing beside Moses in the tabernacle. They aren't the ones carrying on his prophetic legacy. In fact, they're barely mentioned again, outside of a genealogy in 1 Chronicles 20:15-17. That's it. They were sons of the man who saw God's glory pass by, the man who parted the sea, the man who stood toe-to-toe with Pharaoh and didn't flinch. But the children of that giant disappear from the narrative. Why? The honest answer is, we don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. And we need to be careful not to speak where Scripture stays silent, but we can reflect and we can learn. We do know that Moses' wife Zipporah wasn't present when Moses returned to Egypt. Exodus 4:20 says, "So Moses took his wife and his sons and had them ride on a donkey and went back to the land of Egypt." But by Exodus 18, we find that Jethro brings Zipporah and the boys to Moses in the wilderness. Somewhere along the way, she had returned to her father's house. We don't know when or why. We also know that leadership didn't pass to Gershom or Eleazar. That mantle went to Joshua, son of Nun, a man of a different tribe, a man who was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him, Deuteronomy 34:9. Not his sons, a faithful servant. That tells us something. Legacy in God's eyes is not inherited, it's lived. The silence about Gershom and Eleazar doesn't mean they were ungodly. It doesn't mean they failed. But it does mean this: proximity to someone else's walk with God does not guarantee your own. That's a humbling thought for us, especially if we're parents, leaders, or mentors. We want those we love to carry the flame. We hope they'll walk where we walked. But at the end of the day, faith cannot be passed on like an heirloom. It must be chosen. We also don't know how Moses' left calling affected his relationship with his sons. It's possible they were distant, both geographically and emotionally. For all of Moses' closeness with God, the text doesn't speak much about his closeness with his family. The demands of leadership are real, and sometimes they come with a cost. There's no scandal around Moses' sons, no rebellion, just silence. But the silence speaks. It reminds us that even the great heroes of faith lived with the limits of humanity. It reminds us that God's story isn't about bloodlines, it's about obedience. It reminds us that we cannot ride the coattails of another person's faith. And most of all, it reminds us to be intentional. If we want our children, our friends, our church family to walk in faith, we can't just assume it will happen. We can model it, we can encourage it, we can pray. But in the end, each person must walk with God on their own feet. So what do we take from the sons of Moses? We remember that calling doesn't always follow family, that silence in Scripture can still echo with truth, and that what matters most is not where we've come from, but who we walk with today. As Paul told Timothy, "But as for you, continue in what you have learned and have firmly believed, knowing from whom you learned it." 2 Timothy 3:14. And as Jesus said plainly, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." John 10:27. Not their parents' voice, not their mentor's voice, his voice. Let's walk in such a way that our names may never need to be written in a book, but our faith will be written on his heart. We'd love to hear how this encourages you today, or any reflections you have from your own walk with God. Feel free to share in the comments so we can grow together in faith.